I think one of the things that is so on people's mind, including mine, is a little bit of fear about the disruption to the supply chain. So maybe you could just say a few words on how you think the next few weeks or months will play out. Are we going to have any disruption to the food supply or medicine or other things in our city environments?
I think we absolutely need to be paying very close attention to the resilience and the security of supply chains. And so we are right to focus on it. The good news is, I think as long as we focus on it, identify gaps, we have time to close those gaps. Where we are likely to have a problem is if we're not paying attention now and just letting things happen. So what I'll say about supply chains is, you can think about them as this group of companies that are working to balance supply with demand. And you can have a disruption on either side, right? You can have big changes in demand, or you can have interruptions of supply. Either one of those can result in a disruption to the supply chain. What we're seeing right now is mostly disruptions on the demand side, right? A big spike in demand for toilet paper, for some other things, which hospital masks, medical equipment. We're also seeing a rapid drop in demand for a lot of things, right? So think about anything tied to sporting events, restaurants, bars. The supply chains for those are still moving. There's just no place for that to go. They're getting plugged up. So I think we need to be looking at each of those demand disruptions and figuring out if it's just a short-term hiccup that will settle itself out over time, which I think is the case with toilet paper, or if there is truly an increased need. We're going to be consuming more of these products, which I think is the case in hospital masks. And for that, we really need to focus on, okay, how do we scale up the capacity in our supply chains to meet that level of demand? We may need to open new factories. We may need to retool factories. We need to find new sources of supply in order to make sure that we can get ahead of what is going to be a growing demand for the next several months. The longer term concern, and like I say, I think we can get ahead of it, but it's a real concern, are going to be interruptions in supply. Many of the engineered devices in our daily lives, I'm thinking about appliances, cars, medical equipment, if not the entire assembly, some of the parts come from other parts of the world, right? Supply chains are complex, and people talk a lot about China, but the truth is there's a lot of component manufacturing that occurs throughout Asia, and a lot of advanced manufacturing that occurs throughout Europe, and a lot of raw components that come from Africa and South America. And so as countries begin to close their borders, as India did, I believe, yesterday, that really does create a risk of a supply disruption. So for a company that needs a component, an ingredient, if the only place that you can get that is from India, and if the entire country of India is shut down for, we'll call it a month, and unable to manufacture and export those products, we very well could start to see some shortages of critical things in a month, 2 months down the road. Like I say, the good news is I think we have time if we're paying attention now and understanding where our supply chains map back to identify those gaps and either work with the authorities in those countries to come up with a compromise or find alternate sources of supply elsewhere.
Yeah.
The other thing that concerns me is the people that work in supply chains. So it's pretty easy to say, well, the supply chain is still working and trucks are moving and factories are able to operate if they're in critical industries. But if in fact we get to the place that people are sick and can't come to work or need to be quarantined, we may not be able to operate those factories. We may not be able to drive those trucks. And so I think one of the things that we need to be really thoughtful about right now is how do we protect those people working in the supply chain so that the supply chain can continue to function?